What if everything you thought you knew about faith, religion, the universe, and success wasn't the whole truth? What if the answers have been in front of us all along, hidden in religion, science, and the very fabric of reality? I grew up in the Bible Belt, surrounded by deep faith, but as I got older, I started questioning. That search led me to study psychology, philosophy, and ultimately law, where I was trained to analyze evidence and think critically. As a prosecutor and later a defense attorney, I built my career on uncovering the truth beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I bring that same investigative mindset to life's biggest questions: faith, spirituality, and the forces that shape our lives. I'm Alexis Austin, and this is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the search for truth. It's time to uncover the evidence. My name is Alexis Austin. I am a former prosecutor, criminal defense attorney turned consultant for law firm business owners, life coach, and now podcaster. The real purpose behind this podcast is to teach these principles of success that I've learned over the last 20 years. But to do that, I think it's important to show a lead up to how I got here, so that if you're in any stage that I'm describing or anywhere similar, it gives you that sign that you can do what I've done as well and more. I learned early on how to adapt and how to conform myself to whatever group I was in. And the time for that is over. I truly believe that you cannot live and be as successful as you can be in life by being inauthentic. I want to go through and give you all a brief history of who I am and where I came from, so that you can understand the perspective from which I'm coming to these ideas of success. I was born in an army base to a mother and a father who were very, very young. Eventually, my mom and my dad got divorced, and we moved to a little town in the middle of nowhere called Barren Plains, Kentucky. And I tell you what, Barren Plains is the perfect description for this place. No offense, family, if you're listening to this, but we can all agree there is literally nothing there. I take that back. There is one store. At the time, it was a store/gas station with one or two pumps. And the next town over was a town called Dot. That's the environment in which I was raised for the majority of my childhood. My mom remarried, and my stepdad, who was part of this wonderful family. And part of this family was they had a church. So I grew up as being raised in this very small community. It was a very close-knit community. No joke, all of my family lived within a mile radius of me, and we all went to the same church, which was in a tiny log cabin on my grandfather's property, which was right next to my house. I had unique small town experiences, and I was raised in this environment of very deep faith. It was in the South. It was all of those things that you hear about as far as experiences in the Bible Belt. In our particular sect of Christianity, we were Pentecostal. I was raised from this perspective of having a close relationship with God, listening to the people in charge, so the elders of the church, the pastors, and seeking connection with God through that lens of apostolic faith. So that was the background that I came from. I also was homeschooled. It was a very good experience. But there were things that were not so great. Again, it wasn't my family church, but there were things that I was exposed to in this time of life where I developed very negative impressions of what it meant to be a leader in religion. I had very negative experiences with certain leaders of other churches, but I also was sexually molested by a person who was a high up religious figure. And that really began my divide from God and from faith. And to be honest and fair to my family, I didn't remember what happened. I repressed what happened to me very, very deeply until I was about 27 years old. During this time, I was really struggling. I was struggling as a young child with my relationship with God, with faith, with people in positions of authority. And that kind of set the stage for what happened throughout my life. I went through, as everybody I think does, a little period of rebellion when I cut off all my hair, started wearing makeup, started wearing very, very revealing clothing in high school. I went through that for a couple of years. I ended up actually coming back to my faith and getting married at the age of 18. This was something that was very normal in the environment in which I was raised. I met my then husband at a church camp and got married very, very young. That did not last long, as you might suspect, and within 3 years, I was divorced by the age of 21. Once I got into college, I at first was trying to find a career that would complement my husband. I had been told that my job was to support my husband in my life and in my career, and so I believed that the only thing that I could really do as far as a career was to find something that supported him. So he was going to pharmacy school, so I needed to find something that would support that. When that marriage failed, it failed, I think, mostly because I was having an existential crisis. I could have made it work. I could have sought help. We did seek therapy, but I think what was really going on was there was something much bigger happening in my life where I was coming to terms with, or trying not to come to terms with, what had happened to me in my childhood. And I started down this very dark path. And that dark path continued for about 10 years. During that time, I was drinking very heavily, engaging in very unsafe behavior. But there was always this part of me that had to know what it all was about, what was going on. And so as I was going through this kind of rebellious stage and trying to figure out life and existence, I decided to get a degree in psychology because I thought, well, if I can understand my mind, then I can help other people. And so I told myself at first that I was going into psychology to understand the idea of mass hysteria and how like religion develops around these shared concepts. But really what I was doing is I was trying to understand myself because, like I said, I had repressed those memories of sexual abuse from a younger time. And I think I was subconsciously trying to bring it forward and understand it, but in a way that made logical sense. I was doing all these things. And in the midst of it, I've always been an overachiever, even when I was going through the darkest periods in my life. So I couldn't just take a normal caseload, right? I think I was taking on average around 21 to 23 credit hours a semester. It was insane. But I've always had that trait where I work hard to run from the truth. I work hard to avoid the problems. I stay so busy that I can't think about anything else. And I think that a lot of people go through that. They are just trying to go, 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 go. Because if they stop, if they allow themselves to pause, then there's that opportunity for truth to come in. There's that opportunity to recognize what it is you've been avoiding. And it's much safer to just push through and push through and push through and strive than to sit with it and to let things unfold naturally and to understand what it is that you deep down are trying to show yourself. So while I was getting my psychology degree and I was working 2 jobs at 2 different restaurants and working in 2 different psychological research labs, I also started studying philosophy. And I started out because I was saying, okay, I want to understand the way I was raised. I want to understand religion. And so I started off studying the Abrahamic faiths. So I took a couple of philosophy courses on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam and how they're all connected. This was really the starting point of showing me how much I wanted to dig in and how much I wanted to learn. And again, it was that subconscious, that small voice trying to say, hey, look, there's more here. You're doing this even accidentally. Very, very long story long. I finished my courses, and then I was stuck. I had what I perceived to be 2 completely useless degrees, one in psychology and one in philosophy. Like, what do you do with that? So a friend of mine and I just made a deal. My friend said, I'll take the GRE and see what happens there. I said, okay, I'll take the LSAT, see what happens. And then if I get a good score, maybe I'll go to law school. I ended up getting a good enough score to get into a great law school. I went to the University of Denver. That was a huge step for me because I pulled away from my family. I moved 2,000 miles away, jumped into law school. And that's when things started getting dark. I was basically rushing. I was trying to find that adrenaline rush, anything I could do. I was out of control. I was in a spiral and I would do everything I could to find people going out. Who's going out tonight? What's going on? I had to stay busy because the few times during that 3-year period of law school that I actually allowed myself to get quiet, I was incredibly depressed. It was so dark. I remember there were times when I would be all alone in my apartment, sitting with a bottle of wine, just chugging straight from the bottle. And I had a knife in my hand, looking at my arm, thinking, how could I cut my arm to just be done? I remember that happened a couple of times. And the only reason I didn't do it was because I looked over and saw my sweet dog there and thought, well, I can't do that to my dog. That was the only reason I didn't. Fast forward to the end of law school, I ended up getting a job as a prosecutor. And I think it was all that subconscious trying to say, hey, you need to help these people that are abused and hurting. Started my career as a prosecutor. I loved it. I loved being a Again, I worked myself to death. And back then I was working around 100 hours a week, making about 40 to 42,000 a year. It was an experience where I was doing something that I felt was worthwhile, but I was still struggling. Through that period of time from leaving undergrad to a couple of years into my prosecutory career, I was terrible with relationships. I had so many dates and so many, like, jumping from boyfriend to boyfriend. I was not emotionally steady. And I was searching and I was spinning. Then I met this man who was a prosecutor in another county and decided to engage in a relationship with him and ended up sticking with it longer than I had before. It's usually my relationships. They were either on and off relationships, which could span anywhere from like a couple of weeks to on and off for a couple of years, or they lasted like a hot second. But this one I made last a couple of years, and it was obvious now looking back that I was searching for someone who was as broken and hurting as I was. That was truly the most traumatic relationship of my life. I won't go into it all. There was a lot of family darkness. There was a lot of abuse, a lot of sexual abuse. Again, it kept coming up in my life and finding me. It was just a very, very dark period. And it got to the point where in 2016, I was done. I couldn't do it anymore. I was completely broken. And it's interesting because on the outside, everything looked good. But on the inside, I was destroying myself. I was engaging still in very destructive behavior. I was still drinking very heavily. I was out of control spiritually, mentally, and I was lost. I've reached a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And I tried to commit suicide. I bring this up because I believe that every single person that is meant to do something more has to go through what's known as the dark night of the soul. I don't know why it is. I don't know if it's just because we have to go through this reckoning with what we are dealing with and what we're experiencing to turn out the noise to get to the truth of what's going on. For me, that's what happened. It wasn't until this point where I completely gave up that I started to open myself back up to who I really was and what my faith was leading me to do. Fortunately, in that very dark time, I was found before it was too late and rushed to the hospital and then put on a 72-hour hold and then put into a mental hospital. And that was my lowest point. I was this outwardly super successful person, and I looked down at my shoes that didn't have shoelaces and thought, what on earth am I doing here? What have I done to myself? What have I allowed to happen in my life? Why am I here? And as I was in that place, it was the first time where I had to have silence. Like, this was the first time where I had mandatory silence, because they don't give you a lot of TV in the psych ward. They don't give you really anything except a couple of books, and even those are limited. And I remember sitting outside during my hour, scribbling, just writing, just finally letting myself sit in the quiet and think about what I had done, where I had come from, why I was here. And that was when things started to turn around. Now, I don't want to leave it at too dark a spot. I promise the story gets much better. Things get much lighter, but I think it's important to see that evolution from where I was to the darkest point so that you can see everyone has a story, everyone has a background. And in the next episode, I'll talk about what happened from that point and how I came to own multi-million-dollar businesses and have success and have a wonderful, loving relationship with my husband and have a son. It all turned out to be the most wonderful experience of my life because I was able to sit in that stillness and quiet. But I bring that up just in case, and you are in a place like that, you are that low. Number one, do not get to the point that I did. Seek help immediately. Seek help. Make sure that you are not letting yourself get to that low point, and instead allow yourself to engage with that quiet, because that's where the truth really comes in. So I will see you next time to finish part 2 of the story of who I am and how I got here on the next episode of Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, The Search for Truth.